on here tonight. All right, so we're going to bring Robert Sullivan on with us and get this train
Hello.
traveling. Hello, Robert. How are you tonight? This is Michael.
I'm well. How are you?
I am doing just fine, and it is a pleasure to have you back.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being on. Thank you for having me back on Late Night in the Midlands, Mike. It's much appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the appreciation's really on my end because you're taking time out to help us better understand something that I got to say that most people probably don't know nearly as much about as you do, and I appreciate that.
Well, sure. It's great to be here.
All right. Well, Robert, if we could start, maybe you could start by telling us what drove you to the work that you do, and how did it all start? Where did you start with all this?
Right. Sure. Well, the book that I currently published, which is basically a month old, Cinema Symbolism, that was born out of a book that I wrote and was published 2 years ago called The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism. Just briefly, that book began for me when I was an associate student at Oxford University back in 1992, 1993. I spent my junior year abroad there. And it was really there that I got introduced to the works of Francis Yates, the impact of the Hermetic tradition on material society, secret societies, things like that. There was a lot of research I started doing, reading these books. I became a Freemason in 1997 in Amicable St. John's Lodge number 25 here in Baltimore, Maryland. I became a 32nd degree in the Scottish Rite here in Baltimore as well in 1999. And I continued writing the books and doing the research. And it really wasn't until around 2005, 2006 that I really began to put pen to paper with this thing. And this is the first book I published called The Royal Arch of Enoch, which I was on your show, I think, about a year ago, actually, talking about this. But I'll just go over it briefly again.
Thank you.
And this book presents, it's a 700-page book, and it presents this historical anomaly going on that was never before documented, that this particular higher degree ritual known as the Royal Arch Ceremonial, the Royal Arch of Enoch, in the Scottish Rite, it's also called the Royal Arch of Solomon. In the York Rite, it's called the Royal Arch of Zerubbabel. Was incorporating elements of the Book of Enoch, which shouldn't be happening. The ritual was being developed in the 1740s, 1750s, and the Book of Enoch, one Enoch, was lost to history from around the 2nd century, 3rd century AD, all the way up until 1773, when a man named James Bruce returned to Europe with copies from Ethiopia. Those copies remained untranslated in the basement of the Bodleian Library at Oxford University until 1821. So this book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, presented this historical anomaly, talks a lot about the history of Freemasonry, why this degree is so important, a lot of the symbology, the philosophies coming out of it, how they were shaping material culture, the United States of America. I got into the whole Masonic architecture of things like Washington, D.C., things going on in New York State, New York City, the Statue of Liberty. I'm sorry?
Oh, no, I'm listening. You might be getting a little feedback.
There must have been a little bit of feedback.
Yeah.
But and things like the Erie Canal, things going on in New York, things going on in Baltimore, Maryland. And the book came out, and what I did was, when the Royal Arch of Enoch, I brought this sort of up to modern day by, in the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch, I talked about Masonic, Enochian, solar symbolisms going on in some popular movies that I clearly had seen. Most notably, things like the National Treasure movie, the very first one, is a retelling of the Royal Arch Ceremonial. It's the location of the Masonic treasure vault beneath the Holy Ground, which is the Royal Arch ritual. Masonic elements turn up in National Treasure 2. Movies like Excalibur, which is by and large a solar allegory. Things like the Da Vinci Code, which is basically a shrine to the number 13. Things like that. This was documented in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. It's the final chapter. And what happened was, there was a lot of other movies that I wanted to talk about that incorporated this sort of Kabbalistic, numerological, astrological, mythological underpinnings, themes, concepts going on in them. And of course, it didn't really fit into the Royal Arch of Enoch book. Cinema Symbolism is about 470 pages long. So what I did was, immediately when Royal Arch of Enoch was published, I started writing Cinema Symbolism, a guide to esoteric imagery in popular movies, all but immediately. and it's really, for lack of a better word, a continuation of the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch. And this book was published about a month ago. It's brand new, and it documents, again, these sort of mythological, numerological, Kabbalistic, alchemical, mystical symbols, and iconography being placed in popular movies. And it's really unique. It's a fascinating study because I'm 100% convinced the material is in there. Most of the time it's in there intentionally. And it's a book that took me about 2 years to write. And in a nutshell, I'll just wrap up on this. I'll wrap up your question with basically what I did was, with all the research I did when I was doing the Royal Arch of Enoch, studying things like, the occult, mysticism, mythology, Freemasonry, numerology, astrology, Kabbalah. I basically applied that to movies. And you'll clearly see, this material and this, these themes turning up in popular cinema. This is beyond dispute. I believe, like I said, I believe most of the time it's intentionally placed there. And this is the new book I wrote. It's titled Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies, and it was released about a month ago.
Fantastic. And I want to get into that very soon, but I had a few other questions for you before we even hit that area.
Sure.
One, for starters, we talk about symbolism often here, especially now we have a host on this network who is deep into it. You might know him, Ryan Gable, with the Secret Teachings. And
yes, I did. I was on that show.
Oh yeah, well, he also his show is here on the L&M network as well. We run it too, and on Wednesday nights, him and I do a show together. So he certainly has opened my eyes to this area a lot more, and we find symbolism all over the United States. But what does the symbolism actually mean, and who is it placed there for? Why is it there? How relevant is it today for us?
Well, it's a good question to ask. A lot of what you would call, just symbolism, like, when you get into, it's a broad question. I'll try to answer it as best I can.
Sure.
But, like, for example, a lot of the stuff going on, in Washington, D.C., for example, with some of the sacred architecture, the sacred geometry, the astrological architecture, and it invokes both Blue Lodge and high-degree Freemasonry. There are several reasons why it's being done. Like when you're talking about like the astrological, alignments and things like that, the idea is that by aligning your building to the stars, certain constellations, you're symbolically drawing down divinity to Earth. The idea is that because the stars, the planets, the constellations are closer to God in heaven than we are, you're drawing down heaven on Earth. This comes from the work of a Renaissance, a medieval Christian mystic named Raymond Lully. This philosophy was also carried forward by a Dominican friar named Giordano Bruno. This is what is also known as the Hermetic maxim of as above, so below. So by doing things like that, and again, like by incorporating Royal Arch, Masonic symbolism, it's this degree that the name of God is recovered. So again, you're sort of investing the symbol or the icon with God, divinity, concepts of sacred notions relating to a supreme being, I guess would be one way of saying it. And to kind of carry this forward a little bit, because I get asked this routinely when I talk about the movie symbolism. It's the same sort of question: is why is this being placed there? It's the same sort of concept. I think a lot of times that these movie makers are putting this mythology and these symbols on the screen. What they're trying to do is, it is the same thing with sacred architecture, with incorporating things like the golden ratio, Vesica Pisces, things like that, is you're turning the movie with a piece of celluloid into this, work of, this masterful, piece of art, basically. It's a transformative process where instead of watching just, a movie, you're actually viewing this sort of Kabbalistic alchemical experience that can, actually effectuate your emotions. So that's kind of the way I see it. Some people see it as forms of mind control. I kind of don't go down that path. But, the symbolism, the incorporation of this stuff, it gets a bad rap. Sometimes people see it as evidence of this demonic conspiracy. I don't see it that way at all. and especially when you're dealing with things like the United States of America, which in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, I have a whole chapter on this. The chapter's called the United States of Freemasonry. I basically say the United States is a Masonic republic, and as such, it incorporates and uses a lot of the symbols, both actual symbols and some of the philosophical lessons going on with Freemasonry, and being taught within Freemasonry, both Blue Lodge and High Degree, being used in things like city designing, architecture, symbols on colleges, universities. So yeah, you'll find it all over the place. Again, I don't really see it as sinister, but it's definitely there. Some people do, but I see it as more of a sort of kind of divine enlightenment being employed by the use of this material.
So it's not a sign that the Jews or the Masons or the Illuminati is running the entire world?
That's the way a lot of people see it. I mean, I don't really see it that way. I see it as more of the guys who are creating the United States, going back to the founding fathers. People like DeWitt Clinton were all Freemasons, and they were very impressed with the teachings of it. So they use it in things like city planning, in architecture. You'll find it in colleges and universities. This comes out of the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial, where it's the restoration of lost wisdom. So, if you're restoring knowledge and wisdom, yeah, you would incorporate it into maybe a logo or a coat of arms on a college or university. So, I don't shy away from this either. And when you get into the early days of the country, there is a definite strong Illuministic influence going on. So you can see icons associated with the Illuminati on this stuff. But I see it more as people using it on their own unilaterally because they're impressed with it. Then I see some sort of hidden hand directing people to use it. That being said, yeah, I mean, the use of this material is overwhelming. So, either people are using it or, Freemasonry, people are either using the emblems and philosophies of Freemasonry, but, maybe there is some sort of hidden hand going on within Freemasonry. I've been involved with it for almost 20 years now. I've never seen anything, but, you will find a lot of Masonic influence, symbols, icons, architecture in the United States. And, it does beg the question and even raises my eyebrows a bit. Clearly this is not being done by accident. Clearly this is intentional. I just don't really see it as a sinister force behind it. I see it more as sort of what you would call, Masonic values being used to convey things of the Enlightenment, Renaissance, things like that. But again, some people see it as sinister. It's kind of pick your poison, as it were.
Yeah, and what we're seeing a lot of nowadays, and I was just talking to my friend Ryan about this, is that you're seeing like music videos or rappers or whatever, and they'll purposely use these symbols just because they know that shows like this are going to talk about it. And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's more when you see things like with Katy Perry or Jay-Z or Beyonce or Madonna, I think it's more of the idea is I don't think these people are part of some sort of satanic Illuminati, Hollywood, music industry cabal. I see it more as people who are in their stage production, design team, managers, producers, basically saying, hey, go use this, this stuff is very mystical, this stuff is very influential, it'll get people to talking about it, good or bad. They don't care one way or the other as long as people are talking about it. So, I mean, that's really the way I see it. Some of this stuff is being used. And I also see this in movies as well. I hear this, I've seen videos on this all the time, that every time a triangle pops up in a movie near a circular object, oh, this is the eye in the triangle, this is demonism, this is the Illuminati, this is an Illuminati movie. I don't see it that way at all. I mean, there are times when this stuff is intentionally placed there and can have mystical meaning. I do not dispute that. But a lot of times also with things like Beyonce and Katy Perry, the whole agenda of Hollywood is they're agents provocateurs, for lack of a better term. So anything they can do to get people talking about their movies and things like that, you know, that they'll utilize one way or another, even if it's, you know, to generate negative, you know, press or anything. It's the old line. There's no such thing as bad publicity. So, yeah, I mean, they will utilize this stuff and take full advantage of it.
Yeah, I was just going to say that any publicity is good publicity, as the motto goes. Now, is this symbolism, is it relevant to today, or is it more relevant to our history and understanding our history?
Well, again, it's a tough question to answer because it kind of depends on your take on it. I mean, certainly the symbols, I talk about this in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, and the best way I describe it is, you know, are these symbols, and especially these symbols with Freemasonry, you know, are they almost, you know, and I put the word in quotes, alive, meaning, you know, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, are these symbols alive in that every generation of Freemasons that come along breathe new life and new interpretation into them. You know, when it comes to symbology and these symbols, and I always stress this to, you know, when I come on, you know, shows such as this, that there are always multiple level meanings to this stuff. And, you know, one way of looking at this is, and I talk about this in the book, is, you know, there's always sort of what you'd call the exoteric explanation as, you know, contrasting the esoteric explanation. So there's always sort of this profane explanation, and then there's a more mystical interpretation of this. So, you know, the symbols, yeah, they're important. They help us understand our past. But I think also, in a way, they also project the future, and, you know, are relevant today. And, you know, because, you know, we are living in the present, they help us understand the past, and as such, help us, navigate the future.
I see. Now, somebody had asked, and I told them I'd pass this along, and they want to know what the role of the Jesuits in the formulation of high degree masonry. They want to know what role of power do they possess in today's world?
Well, the Jesuits are much like the Freemasons. In 1773, the Jesuits had their power cut out from under them by the Pope when the Society of Jesus was suppressed. They do reemerge, but again, they're a shadow of their former self. They reemerge after the wars of, they reemerge after the wars of Napoleon I. I want to say in around 1814, 1815, the Society of Jesus is restored, as is the Holy Inquisition, as is the Papal States. But they're a shadow of their former selves. Freemasonry undergoes the same thing in the 1820s when, after the William Morgan affair, Freemasonry is viewed very negatively. It does survive the attack, the William Morgan affair, but its power has been substantially cut out from under it. But it does survive. But getting back to your original question, what role does the Jesuits play in Freemasonry? Yeah, this is an issue I talked about before on other shows. I talk about it in the book, in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. And I'll just give a bit of a backstory on this. I'll try to be brief. You have modern day Freemasonry as it exists today, being formulated in England in 1717 on June the 24th. This is the official birthday of modern day Masonry, as it exists today. This is the formulation of degrees 1, 2, and 3, what is commonly known as the Blue Lodge. This is the degrees of entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason. Once you complete the third degree, then you're a Freemason. You can hold yourself out as a Freemason. Some Masonic lodges require you to do a catechism of the lodge working, of the ritual working. Once the catechism is completed, then you can hold yourself out as a Mason. My lodge required that of me. But to make a long story short, once you complete the third degree, you're a Freemason. Freemasonry is created by, for lack of a better word, non-denominational Christians in England. It incorporates Judeo-Christianity. It incorporates a lot of other mystical elements in Blue Lodge Freemasonry. Things coming out of the ancient mystery schools, some Egyptian motifs, Mithraism, Zoroastrianism, Gnosticism. And again, this is degrees 1, 2, and 3. It's decidedly English. It's pro-monarchy. And it's basically Protestant, for lack of a better word. The high degrees of Freemasonry, this is what ultimately becomes the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, which are the two premier high degree bodies of Freemasonry in the world today. This comes years later. This is being developed by the Society of Jesus at a place called the College of Clermont in Paris, France, as part of the Counter-Reformation. The Jesuits at the Council of Trent, after the Protestant Reformation, were charged with something called the Counter-Reformation, where the Catholic Church put the Society of Jesus in charge of destruction of anything English and anything Protestant. So if there was anything that was Protestant English on the map that popped up, the Society of Jesus's modus operandi was seek and destroy. So in 1717, you have modern-day Freemasonry pop up in England. It's Protestant. It's very popular. It's pro-monarchy. And, of course, the English monarchs at the time were all Protestant. After 1701, forbid the Act of Settlement forbid a Roman Catholic from ever sitting on the English throne. So what the Society of Jesus develops is what's known as the Rite of Perfection, and these degrees are degrees 1 through 25. It's actually 22 degrees. Degrees 1, 2, and 3 are the Blue Lodge, but it's 25 degrees, known as the Rite of Perfection. These degrees are decidedly Roman Catholic. They sort of go against some of the teachings of Blue Lodge Freemasonry. They incorporate things such as papal monarchy, Kabbalistic apotheosis, transformation of the Mason into a godlike being, and these become very popular on the continent of Europe. And what they are symbolically doing is the higher degrees are trying to serve as a vehicle to restore the Roman Catholic side of the Stuart monarchy back to the throne of England. This is where the term Scottish Rite comes from. The Stuarts were originally the kings of Scotland, and when in the 13th and 14th degree, when the name of God is discovered, the secret vault is dedicated to James VI, King of Scotland. So this is your Scottish influx, your Scottish reference on the degrees. But at any rate, the Society of Jesus is developing these degrees as part of the Counter-Reformation to sort of, infiltrate Freemasonry. The degrees become very popular. They do not take off in England, especially in London, where the arch enemy of the English people from day one has been the French. And of course, ever since the Henrican settlement, where the Vatican was tossed out in the 1520s, the Church of England was created. The Catholics have always been viewed as suspicious. And of course, the Jesuits were behind the Spanish Armada, where they tried to kill Queen Elizabeth or take over the country. The Guy Fawkes plot of 1605 was a Jesuit plot. So anything associated with the Jesuits, and especially the French, is not popular in London for the obvious reason. But the degrees become very popular, and certain portions of the degrees are practiced in places like Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Royal Arch, Mark Master Mason. The degrees ultimately come to the United States, degrees 1 through 25, or it's really degrees 4 through 25, to be honest. They're midwifed into this country through the West Indies by a man named Stephen Morin, or A.T.N. Morin. And make a long story real short, and by the time they get here, the Society of Jesus seems to be out of the picture. They cultivate them, but after any concept of Stuart restoration passes in England, they sort of walk away from them. So the high degrees turn up in the United States. Certain lodges of perfection are set up, the main one being in Albany, New York, created by a man named Henry Franken. This is in the 1760s. I want to say in 1767, he publishes a series of manuscripts outlining these degrees, these 25 degrees. This is what ultimately becomes the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which is set up in Charleston, South Carolina in 1801. This is degrees 4 through 33, the Mother Supreme Council of the World, with the 33rd degree being honorary. The primary driving force behind this is a man named Frederick Dalcho. In the 1790s, a man named Thomas Smith Webb gets a hold of this manuscript and picks apart two rituals in particular. One called the Mark Master Mason is formed by him out of the a Rite of Perfection and the Holy Royal Arch. And Webb publishes in 1797 an illustration in the United States documenting his Masonic progression, which incorporates 7 degrees, including the first 3 degrees of Blue Lodge. And it's this illustration, this monitor, that ultimately births the York Rite of Freemasonry. So you have these two high degree systems basically coming out of Paris, France, known as the Rite of Perfection, originally developed by the Society of Jesus, but they sort of fade out of the picture by the 1760s, late 1750s, after any concept of or any possibility of Stuart restoration in England.
I see. Now, the United States, basically, it was put together by Masons, wasn't it?
Right. You have a lot of Masonic influence on the formulation of the United States of America. And you do have actually a bit of a Jesuit encroachment even on the blue degrees. But to make a long story real short, yeah, I mean, you have, Masonic influence right off the bat. The concept of the triple division of government of the United States between an executive, a legislature, and a judicial comes from the triple division of government in the Blue Lodge of Freemasonry, where the lodge is governed by a worshipful master and two senior wardens. This is all a solar reference. The worshipful master sits in the east, representing the rising sun. The junior warden sits in the south of the lodge, representing the sun at meridian or at noon, when the sun's strongest at midday. And the senior warden sits in the west as the setting sun. So the triple division of government in the Blue Lodge is paralleled in the United States with the triple division of government between a chief executive, which was the president, and a judiciary and a legislative body. In our case, it's the House and Senate. That comes straight out of Blue Lodge Freemasonry. The concept of the incorporation of, I believe it's the First Amendment, of church and state, separation of church and state. This comes straight out of James Anderson's Constitutions of Freemasonry. Anderson, he was a Presbyterian minister, a Calvinist. Shortly after, in England in 1717, after you have the creation of the what you basically call the modern day Blue Lodge system of Freemasonry, shortly thereafter, I want to say it's 1721, 1724, I'd have to look it up to get the exact date, a man by the name of James Anderson publishes the Constitutions of the Freemasons. This outlines its legendary history, and again, I stress the word legendary, and it talks about, it lays out guidelines for Freemasonry, sets bylaws up, and one of the first bylaws he sets up is that Freemasonry, Blue Lodge Freemasonry, is going to be deistic, meaning that you have to believe in a supreme being, but your religion is your own. So there's a separation of religion out of the Blue Lodge. You'll find this in the First Amendment with the separation of church and state. That's decidedly Masonic. You will find Masonic overtones, architecture in the Federal District of Washington, D.C. You will find it in a lot of the major cities, especially cities that were founded early on in the United States, things like New York City, Baltimore, Maryland. You will find it in construction projects, and again, especially ones at the outset of this country, like the Erie Canal, at colleges and universities, such as Union College of Schenectady, New York. This is all documented in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. So yeah, you have basically what's going on is, as the United States of America, and I document this in the Royal Arch, is basically the world's first Masonic republic, for lack of a better descriptive term.
That is absolutely fascinating. It is, and that's the real history, and that's what I mean when I say that most people have no idea.
Oh no, I agree with you. This is one of the motivating factors that was behind writing this book, was to present this sort of lost Masonic history of the United States. I'm writing another book on Freemasonry right now. And again, you get into this whole thing with this Masonic influence going on. One of the main people, I mean, everybody knows sort of, when you get into Masonic founding fathers, sort of everybody knows the Washingtons and the Franklins, people like that. That the guy who has been written out of our history books, who is one of the most important, he's really one of the founding fathers after the founding fathers. He's really the driving force behind this whole concept of a Masonic republic. After the death of George Washington in 1799, is this man named DeWitt Clinton, who is a former mayor of New York, former governor of New York State. He has been completely exorcised out of American history books by and large. I mean, he is really the driving force behind using Freemasonry, its symbols, its teaching tools, both on a Blue Lodge and high degree level, to formulate the United States of America.
How did Freemasonry get such a horrible rap? Because for one, I know some hardcore, I'll call them hardcore Christians who, the
Right.
Bible is it. That's it. There's nothing else. And they tell me, secret societies are evil and they're against God and they're, you guys are doing rituals and you're ruling the world. And I say, well, in your churches, you're doing rituals too. So.
Right. Of course. Yeah, I mean, Freemasonry, Freemasonry is not anti-Christian. It's just different in the sense that you have to have a belief in a supreme being, a God, but however you get to that God is up to you. So you can be a Christian and join, you can be deistic and join, you can be Jewish and join, Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, but you can't be atheist and you can't be agnostic. Now, to be honest with you, if you are what you would call your non-denominational Christian, you're not going to have a problem with this. But, there are some in the Catholic Church and what you would call your more conservative Christians who take issue that if you are in a Masonic lodge and they are invoking deity, and in Masonry, this God figure is generally called the great architect of the universe. Sometimes he's called the great geometrician, or God, just God himself. They take exception to that because you're not saying the name Jesus Christ, but you're also not saying the name Buddha or you're not saying the name Krishna. There is no, religious figure introduced. It's just deism. It's just God. If you are, like I said, sort of a non-denominational Christian, you probably won't have a problem with this. But if you are and I'm not knocking it, I'm not criticizing it, but if you're a blend of Christianity is more of what you would call the right-wing, super conservative side, you might have a problem with this. Where Freemasonry gets a bit of a bad rap from, and I talk about this in the book also, and there's no denying this, and this is what I was talking about 5-10 minutes ago, was this thing that happened in the United States called the William Morgan affair. Make a long story short, in the 1820s, this publisher in Batavia, New York, named William Morgan, threatened to expose a lot of the secrets of Freemasonry, which was the handshakes, the pass grips, the pass tokens, the secret names. That's a no-no. Even as a Mason today, I'm not, they don't want you talking about that. You could talk about the rituals, the history, the philosophical interpretations, the symbols, but they don't really want you talking about things like the handshakes, the passwords, what are generally referred to as the tokens of recognition. But at any rate, this guy Morgan threatened to expose all this, and he was abducted. He was thrown in jail on like a $10 debt, defaulting on a debt. He was taken out of the jail by a group of Masons in the middle of the night. He was taken over the Canadian line and disposed of. We don't know what happened to him other than he was killed. His body has never been found. Most likely thrown into Lake Erie or something like that. And make a long story short, the Masons were put on trial. Who kidnapped him? It was a kangaroo court. The judge was a Mason. The jury were all Masons. Even DeWitt Clinton got involved with this, who was governor of New York at the time. And it was this, they were all acquitted. There was this huge Masonic backlash in the country where Freemasonry was once viewed as this patriotic order that helped create the United States, was now looked at as this sinister cabal. People started to realize that these high-ranking Masons, like DeWitt Clinton, were formulating policy behind closed doors with other Masons. So all of a sudden, all the conspiracy, this is the Illuminati in the United States. This is this dark conspiracy. These guys, are practicing, these dark rites with these rituals. And Freemasonry just develops this bad rap ever since then because of it. Masonry survives the onslaught. And it survives it by two reasons, really. The president, Andrew Jackson, was a devout Freemason. He doesn't cave into the pressure, and he soundly defeats this anti-Masonic candidate named William Wirt that comes along, and that kind of stabilizes Masonry in the country. But as a consequence, Masonry, especially in the United States, has to distance itself from any sort of esoterica, any sort of arcane teachings. Masonry identifies itself as a charitable organization, a philanthropic organization that just helps widows and orphans. any sort of talk of the occult, mysticism, Gnosticism, the ancient mysteries, that's all distanced, and Freemasonry does survive it, but it adopts this sort of profane, and I'm not knocking it, this sort of profane excuse me, attitude of, we're just a charity organization, we're just a fraternal order, that's it. This in the Blue Lodge, this is sort of the attitude that carries Freemasonry through the 19th century, through the 20th century, basically up until around 10, 11 years ago, where you had development of things like the internet, where, you know, and things like the Dan Brown material, things like the National Treasure movie or movies, where there's been this renewed interest now in the mystical side of the craft, which I think is a good thing, an arcane side of the craft. So right now you're beginning to see, and I want to say this has probably started around 2001, 2002, 2003, where you have this pendulum swift or change or swing. Now going back where Freemasonry was just, oh, it's, you know, any talk of the mystical side, any talk of the occult side, this was all just conspiracy theory, nothing to this. Well, now there's this renewed interest in this arcana, and the pendulum is definitely swinging back to the other side.
Yeah, I see. You know, when I first got into the radio business, you know, in the very beginning, I've been in it almost 7 years now. And in the first couple of years, you know, I had people who were associated around me that told me, oh, Masons are horrible, they're bad, you know, they're the problem. And, you know, I see many problems. I think that there's bad apples within all organizations. That goes with Christianity, whatever religion. I don't care what it is. And would you say that Freemasonry is actually a religion in itself?
No, it's actually the polar opposite. It's actually the absence of religion, where religion is sort of yeah, well, it is. What religion is, what things like Judaism, and I'm not knocking this, what things like Christianity, Judaism, Islam are, religions are beliefs about the personality of God, i.e. God likes this but doesn't like that. God likes this but not that. That's what Judaism, Islam, Christianity are. And I'm just using the Abrahamic faith as an example. Masonry doesn't incorporate any of that. It's actually just a belief in a supreme being. How you get there is left to you. Now, I have heard this before, you know, and people have crafted this argument that basically, you know, being theistic, and being, you know, an absence of religion, is that in a way sort of a de facto religion. I don't really see it that way. I see it more as deism. You have to believe in a supreme being, but there is no mandate within Freemasonry that you have to be a Christian, you have to be a Judaism, you have to be Zoroastrianism or Islam. As long as you believe in a supreme being, I mean, I think the words that Anderson uses, I have to go look at something like the Mason's path to God is his own to decide. We don't decide it for him. He's got to decide it on his own. As long as you believe in a supreme being, a godlike figure, you can join the Masons. They don't want atheists and they don't want agnostics. But there is no, I mean, now granted, I'm not going to come on here. I mean, I don't want to, a lot of the rituals in Freemasonry are based on Judaic Christianity. They come out of the Bible. People say, oh, well, that means it's religious. No, it's just they're using these stories, talked about in the Bible to craft rituals around. And even in the rituals, you will find much more of a mystical element, in my opinion, at any rate, than you will a Judaic-Christian element. I mean, the rituals are much more, especially when you get into the higher degrees and in the third degree ritual, those are much more Egyptian, mystical, Gnostic than they are really Judaic-Christian, in my opinion, at any rate. So, yeah, I mean, and as far as, I mean, and you're right. I mean, I agree with you. There, when you have a body, a fraternal order which has had as many people in it as Freemasonry has, and you could say this across the board with any religious or religion or group of people that has a huge amount of people in it. I mean, you're always going to have, controversial figure. I mean, I've been called a controversial figure.
Oh, me too.
I mean, I was on a show about a year ago, hosted by a Freemason who called me demonic. So, I mean, even I've been called controversial, and, that the book, was a controversial thing. So, I mean, you always have controversy within these groups. It's unavoidable.
Yeah, and you know why somebody would say that to you is because they are stuck in a belief system based on what they've been told to think. And that's why that happens. What I see from what you just described, I mean, we're talking about nobody's telling somebody how they have to do things to get to God. You're simply telling people that let's come together and, you know, use your own vehicle, your own tools. However you get there, you get there. Just don't hurt nobody.
That's what it ultimately is trying to do. There's no doubt about that. You know, but there, you know, and I got to be fair and balanced about this. You know, I mean, I agree with you, but you know, it's sort of Freemasonry is basically the sort of thing where, you know, it's the old line: when you enter a Masonic lodge, you're supposed to check your religion and your politics at the door. In fact, you know, I think it comes out of Anderson's constitutions as well, that, you know, there will be no discussion of religion and politics in a Masonic lodge. But of course, we know, you know, that Freemasonry, you know, has influenced a lot of political figures and has influenced their political decisions. And again, you can look no further than, you know, the early days of this country with things like with George Washington adopting the Jay Treaty in England, oversiding with France. This actually comes out of Freemasonry. A lot of the policies formed by DeWitt Clinton were Masonically influenced. So you're really not supposed to discuss politics and religion in a Masonic lodge, but a lot of politicians do use the teachings of Freemasonry to inform their decisions. This is irrefutable.
Fabulous. Robert, we've got to take a break here. We come Michael Vera, and my guest is the one and only Robert Sullivan. And I'll tell you, boy, I don't know how he puts all this knowledge in his head and is able to keep it there. But boy, does he know what he's talking about. And I'll tell you, it's fascinating, folks. The real history. I can't stress it enough. If you think you know about our history, then you'll look into it a little bit. You'll find that you really don't know anything. You only know what you've been told to think. And I'll tell you, let's get into this movie symbolism, the cinema symbolism, if you will, a little bit. What is it? Why is it? And who is responsible for it?
Right. Well, it's the book is called Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies. And again, what I was talking about an hour ago was it's a continuation of this final chapter I wrote in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. And what I was noticing was when I was doing this chapter, and it really was with with the National Treasure movie, was it was this whole retelling of the Royal Arch ceremonial. And what I started doing was applying this research that I had been doing for the Royal Arch of Enoch and putting it towards movies. And when I was watching certain movies, I was seeing themes and, you know, symbols going on in these movies. And I saw enough of them that it convinced me that that I was well beyond the coincidence stage. So what I did was I did the Royal Arch of Enoch book. I did this last chapter where I talk about these, these sort of hidden symbols and themes in mythology and, you know, in movies like the National Treasure movies, and, you know, the Da Vinci Code. I mean, you want an example of this? The Da Vinci Code, and I don't have my book in front of me, but the number 13 shows up all the time, and this is conveying this concept. Every time they need a clue, every time they need wisdom, the number 13 shows up. This is coming straight out of this Royal Arch ceremonial, which is the 13th degree, which is the restoration of wisdom. So every time you need knowledge, the number 13 appears. The movie is decidedly Masonic, so you will find these Masonic themes. You will find the same thing going on in National Treasure Part 2. When they need the information, they need the secret knowledge. It's in Chapter 13 of Riley's book. So I was beginning to see this sort of hidden numerology, these hidden themes going on in movies. And I talked about some of these films at the end of the Royal Arch, but then I was really noticing it in a lot of other movies. So I started writing this new book, which like I said, I just put out. It's only been out for about a month now. Where I talk about this same thing, these Masonic, not all of them are necessarily Masonic, arcane, numerological, astrological, mythological themes, symbols, icons being placed into popular movies. You know, why are they being placed there? There's a couple ways you can look at this. Some people see it as evidence of mind control. I don't really see it that way. I see it more as sort of by placing these symbols and these themes in these movies, they're transforming the movie into this sublime work of art, much like an architect would incorporate, golden ratio, Vesica Pisces, astral alignments to create, a symbolic memory temple, a building that's going to last the test of time, that's aligned to God in heaven. Movies are doing the same thing. They're incorporating these elements to transform the piece of celluloid into this great work of art, for lack of a better word. Who's doing this? Clearly movie producers, writers, screenwriters are doing this. I believe it's intentional. I suggest in the book that part of the reason they're doing this is this comes out of the world of Carl Gustav Jung, what's known as the collective unconscious, the things like magic, sorcery, astrology, and that's really what a movie is. It's visual sorcery. It's watched in a church-like atmosphere, a movie theater. Some of this stuff, magic, sorcery, astrology, religion, mythology, this is all part of what's called the collective unconscious. That by incorporating this stuff, you're appealing to a person's unconscious mind, and it seems to work, and they know that. So, some people see this as a sinister agenda, as mind control. I see it more as, incorporating sacred mythology to appeal to sort of a primal instinct in human beings that we're all have, but we're not aware of it. And Jung talked about this, in Carl Gustav Jung was a very famous psychiatrist. He talked about this in numerous works of his, that there were certain things that were just so inherent, archaic remnants, he called them, passed on from one generation to the next. Things like magic, sorcery, astrology, mysticism, religion, mythology. You'll find this stuff in tarot card symmetry and Freemasonry. These also incorporate things called the archetypes, certain character traits that are predominant in movies as well. So these things are being intentionally placed there to sort of tweak our collective unconscious. Alternatively, and I talk about this as well, movie makers are not immune from the collective unconscious as well. So you will clearly have movies where, and I talk about this, it seems to be the exception, not the rule, where you will find this mysticism in a movie, yet the movie maker was completely, ignorant of the mysticism he was incorporating. I think of the movies of Ed Wood. There's one particular movie of Ed Wood where he incorporates something which I know he had no knowledge of, yet there it is on screen. So the collective unconscious can also affect the filmmakers themselves, and the producers themselves, and the camera captures everything. So to me, by placing this stuff in the movie, you're transforming your movie into this sublime work of art, this piece of mythology. I mean, that's really what movies are. I mean, they're modern day mythology. That's what they are, for lack of a better word. Yeah. So you will find these hidden emblems, and things that symbolize different things going on in the movies. Certain movies, not all, it's not uniform, and it's not in every movie. I stress that. There are some movie makers that do not seem to incorporate this stuff whatsoever. Some do, some greater than others. But it's definitely there. Like I said, if I was seeing this once or twice, and it's the same sort of thing with the architecture of Washington. You see it once or twice, you'd be able to chalk it up to coincidence. But when you see this stuff just over and over again, I mean, some of these guys are just real masters at it. Even with me, you gotta watch these movies. I mean, when I watch these to symbolically diagnose them, usually I have to watch them more than once. I can tell you that. I have to sit there, with a pad, a legal pad in front of me and a pen, taking, voluminous notes on these things. Constantly pausing. These movies will reference things or that happened earlier on. Things change that, that symbolize different things, that can symbolize alchemical transition. And it's just to me, it's really a fascinating study. It impressed me so much that I wrote this book, Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies. And I was so impressed with it that there were even more movies that I wanted to talk about. So as we speak right now, I'm actually writing its sequel called Cinema Symbolism 2. And that's more movies that I'm talking about.
Nice. That's great, because, I've certainly took an interest in this aspect. And I got to say, I've always thought that a lot of this was was put into these movies almost, and it's not that that is what I strongly believe, but I always had it in the back of my mind that these were being put in these movies for people in the know, because before I knew about any of this and I'd watch movies, I didn't know what to look for, so I never noticed. And I wonder.
No, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I just wondered if who these symbols are put in there for, because like you get somebody who's, or lack of a better word, ignorant to this type of thing, then it would just be a movie to them and they would never notice any of it.
Right. Well, there's two ways of looking at it. That's definitely a legitimate take. It's you know, sometimes these things are placed in there and it's like a challenge. It's like, you know, the filmmaker is challenging the person to try to figure it out. And you're right. You know, a lot of people aren't aware of this. They're ignorant of it. On the other hand, if you're dealing, you know, some of this stuff is so adroitly placed. It's not meant to be noticed by the conscious mind, but the unconscious mind, that's what they're tweaking. That's what they're toying with. You know, so some of this stuff is being placed there and you may not notice it, but it's not meant for you to be noticed. And, you know, I think of The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. You know, with this, there's a lot going on in that you would never pay any attention to unless you're aware of it. And then you'll see it everywhere. Once you become tipped off to this, and that's the thing, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is once you tip the person off to this, they'll start looking for it. And that's what I did. When I first started noticing this stuff with things like the Da Vinci Code, where this number 13 just kept showing up over and over again, and then I was seeing it in the National Treasure movies, that's when I knew that I was onto something here. And then you start looking at some of these other movies, you know, with numbers and mythological themes and archetypes. You know, you'll just start, you'll start seeing it. It'll be just much more noticeable. And I was on another show, and I said to them, I said, you know, every time I watch like a Darren Aronofsky movie, I feel like I'm playing a game of chess against Bobby Fischer. You know, I mean, I'm just waiting for him to try to sneak something by me. Because I watch movies like Black Swan, which are just so overloaded with stuff, I actually had to cut it in half. And I put one portion of the Black Swan material in cinema symbolism, and the other material I'm writing in cinema symbolism too. And it's the same thing with The Shining. I talk about The Shining briefly in cinema symbolism, but it's a whole separate portion in cinema symbolism too, just because the material was so overwhelming. I mean, it's the same thing with like Campbell's monomyth, the solar journey, and the solar hero. You know, I talk about it in the context of Star Wars, The Matrix, which is decidedly Gnostic, and the Lord of the Rings movies. You'll find this in other movies such as the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, the Harry Potter material, but it was just so overwhelming to put in the book. I cut it out and I'm putting it in cinema symbolism too. So yeah, I mean, in some instances, this material is actually, I don't believe it's actually meant to be seen. It's more of a tweaking with the unconscious mind, which will pick up on it. And, you know, but when the conscious mind becomes aware of it, that's when it really stands out like a sore thumb.
See, and it does to me now, because, I mean, like this past Super Bowl, I was more interested in the commercials because I was looking for things and I was finding them. Yeah. And so now I watch movies and I look for this stuff. Now, I've watched National Treasure. However, when I watched it, I wasn't looking for these things. So maybe that and The Shining, and tell me a few of the symbolisms that I should be looking for, because I actually have those movies here and I'll get right on them after the show tonight. Right. Well,
the Shining, I'll get to The Shining in a minute, because, I mean, we could spend the next rest of our lives talking about The Shining. And literally, I am not kidding you.
I believe you.
The Shining is really uncanny. Kubrick just really... Stephen King didn't like it, and King didn't know what he was looking at. But you will have a lot of alchemical themes in The Shining, and you'll just have repetition over and over again. I'll get to The Shining in a minute, but yeah, like I'll go to the National Treasure, because this is one of the two movies that this sort of started with for me, where the first National Treasure movie it's a Disney movie, and Disney gets pulled into this a lot. But the first National Treasure movie is the Royal Arch Ritual. If you want to watch the Royal Arch Ceremonial on the big screen or on your Blu-ray or DVD, watch National Treasure. The entire Masonic ritual revolves around the location or the discovery of the Masonic treasure vault beneath the Holy Ground. And in the Masonic ritual, it's the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where Solomon's temple once stood. In the Royal Arch, they're getting ready to build the second temple of Zorobabel, and they discovered this secret trap door on the Temple Mount, and it reveals this treasure vault beneath the ground, this subterranean treasure vault where all this treasure is kept. Most notably, the Pillars of Enoch. And the Tetragrammaton, which is the name of God, the word that's lost in the Blue Lodge. This is also known as the lost word of a master mason. Well, that's the National Treasure movie, is they're using these little Masonic clues to lead them to the Holy Ground, which happens to turn up in New York City of all places, which to me is a clear reference to DeWitt Clinton, who is really the cultivator of high degree and Blue Lodge Freemasonry after the death of George Washington. I mean, this is why New York is called the Empire State. It's the Masonic Empire. It's the Erie Canal, which was Masonic. Union College is connected in New York. The first college developed after the Revolution that offered degrees in civil engineering. The entire symbolism of Union College, from its template to its coat of arms, is Masonic from start to finish. So you have the treasure vault in New York under Trinity College, of all things, Trinity being the tripartite again, Blue Lodge Freemasonry, 3 degrees, and it's the subterranean vault beneath the Holy Ground where the treasure of Freemasonry is located. So, I mean, it's the whole Royal Arch ritual reenacted on the big screen. These same sort of themes turn up, and again, the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite is this Royal Arch, the restoration of knowledge, the restoration of wisdom, the possession of the Tetragrammaton, which restores the 2 Pillars of Enoch, which all learning comes from, according to Masonic lore and legend. And in part 2, you will have the wisdom kept in chapter 13 of Riley's book. In the President's Book of Secrets, there's a reference to the page number 47. This is another Masonic reference to the 47th proposition of Euclid, which is Masonic rulership. The 47th proposition of Euclid is the Pythagorean theorem, which is the emblem of a worshipful master. So you will see a Masonic influence there. So that was the whole National Treasure shtick and symbolism. And this is what really got me started, because like I said, you would see this once or twice. You would kind of, okay, maybe just a coincidence. But then you'll see it there. You'll see it in the Excalibur movie, which is a solar allegory. The entire Arthurian legend is a solar allegory, best seen with the with the Excalibur movie. Then the Da Vinci Code with the number 13. Then the Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp. That was another movie that I talked about in Royal Arch, which is basically Hebrew Kabbalah, and that has a lot of hidden iconography in it as well. But yeah, then I did cinema symbolism, and the Shining is very interesting with Stanley Kubrick. You have what he conveys to you it's a lot of material, but I'll try to condense it. You have the whole movie repeats itself, and this is symbolizing this repetitive reincarnation vicious cycle that's going on inside the Overlook Hotel. There are alchemical themes in this movie, and what I mean by alchemy is it's not about people transmuting base metal into gold. It's about transition of the self in The Shining. It's Jack Torrance being turned into a full-blown psychopath, is his alchemical transition. But you have some unique symbolism going on with dualism, doubles. For example, the Overlook Hotel is an emblem of the United States of America. All the characters, by and large, when they're introduced, Stuart Ullman, who's the manager, wears red, white, and blue, symbolizing the American flag. He has an American flag sitting on his desk. He has an American eagle sitting on his windowsill. When Danny and Wendy are introduced, they are dressed in red, white, and blue, talking about going to the Overlook Hotel. And of course, we were told the Overlook was built on an Indian burial ground. And of course, this symbolizes the dark side of America that most people want to overlook. Hence the name of the hotel, the Overlook. That the United States was built symbolically on the Indian nations, thus burying them. So you'll have this conflict or the symbolism of the United States with the color schemes, with the clothing worn by the characters, you know, against the American Indians. And again, this will be seen in The Shining by the weapons of choice used by the two main characters. The woman uses the baseball bat, which is America's pastime, and Jack Torrance uses the tomahawk axe, or the axe, symbolizing their Indian nation. Again, this is the United States versus America. So you have that symbology going on with The Shining, but then you have an endless cycle of repetition, of never-ending numbers that repeat themselves over and over again. You will find this specifically with the number 21 and the number 2. And again, this is symbolizing repetition, doubles, this endless reincarnation, repetitive cycle going on inside the Overlook. When the movie opens, the movie opens with Torrance driving towards the hotel on this road, and the movie opens where it ends. Basically, the road that he's driving on is called the Going to the Sun Road, of all things, and this again denotes things of alchemy, light. In his case, it would be anti-gnosis. Going to the Sun Road was constructed in 1921. This is where the movie ends in 1921 with the 4th of July photo hanging on the wall. When Jack Torrance meets with Stuart Ullman, he tells him it took him 3.5 hours to get there. That's 210 minutes. 21. The photo hangs in a cluster of 21 photos. 21. You will find the number 42 on Danny's T-shirt. That T-shirt, 21 times 2. At the beginning of the movie. This is carried forward with the movie that Danny and Wendy watch on TV, which is called The Summer of 42. This is again 21 times 2. You will find this on the license plate that Scatman Crothers drives going back to the Overlook. Number 42 is on his license plate. So you'll find this repetitive cycle of doubles, 21 repeating, 42 repeating. The whole movie moves in cycles of 2. It's every other day. It starts on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday, always carried forward in 2s. There were 2 girls that haunt the hotel. They are twins, but they are told by Stuart Ullman they were born 2 years apart. They're 8 and 10. There are 2 mazes in the Overlook, the hotel and the external maze. The Overlook was constructed in 2 years, 1907 and 1909. So you will have this never-ending, the number 12 repeats itself with The Shining. So what Kubrick is doing is he is showing you this endless repetitive cycle of symbols and numbers that is just endless repetitive, symbolizing this never-ending cycle of reincarnation that is occurring in the Overlook Hotel. If you think I am stretching this, the casting of the movie is repetitive. Jack Nicholson plays Jack Torrance. Danny Lloyd plays Danny Torrance. Shelley Duvall, 2 L's in her first name, 2 L's in her last name. Lloyd the bartender serves drinks in a bar in a gold room designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Lloyd the bartender, Frank Lloyd Wright. The entire movie is nothing but symbols of the number 2, doubles that just endlessly repeat themselves. Jack Torrance uses 2 typewriters. There are 2 tennis balls, one green, one pink. When the little boy is playing with the toys, the pink ball rolls in. Wendy Torrance says this is her favorite color, pink. When he sees the pink tennis ball, he says, Mom. Number 12 repeats itself over and over again. And this is astrological going on inside the Overlook. The hotel is KDK 12. The room number, 237, if you add it up, you get the number 12. If you multiply it, you get the number 42. That ties into the 42 symbolism. The Nicholson hits the door 12 times with the axe. He bounces the ball off the wall 12 times. When Danny and Wendy are in the maze, they take 12 turns. So I hope I'm conveying that what you're dealing with when you watch The Shining is this endless repetitive cycle of numbers, actions. It's constantly doubles that you are seeing in The Shining, and what Kubrick is doing is conveying both. I mean, you're never going to count this on the screen, but he doesn't care. He's appealing to your unconscious mind that will be aware of it. And in The Shining, it's just this never-ending cycle of repeating numbers, symbols, and that's all the movie is. It's just symbolic repetition that he is symbolically conveying this vicious cycle of reincarnation going on inside the Overlook Hotel.
And what do you think it does to the subconscious mind? What might be happening there?
Right. Well, what it does is it's conveying to the subconscious mind this endless cycle of reincarnation and repetitiveness that he is so desperate to constantly show you over and over again. It's this theme of reincarnation, which is what the whole movie's about. Does this work? That's debatable, but the Hollywood is printing money by doing this. So you tell me if it works.
So it's kind of like brainwashing.
Huh?
It's kind of like brainwashing then.
No, I don't see it that way at all. To me, it's they're using these numbers and these symbols to convey this hidden message of, and they do it for different purposes. For Kubrick, this is reincarnation, is what he's symbolically planting in your unconscious mind. And again, when you become aware of this, you'll see it all over the place. In The Shining. I mean, that's all the movie is. It's just repeating the same numbers, repeating the same things. The characters say the same dialogue back to each other at certain points. But when you become aware of it, you'll see it all over the place. But, it's more of an appeal to the unconscious mind. There are people out there that see this as mind control and brainwashing. I see it as masterpiece.
I see. Wow, that is just fascinating. Now, who is planning all this? Who is putting all this in there? And do the actors are the actors or the cameramen, are they aware of this?
Well, I mean, to me, the people who are planning it in there would be the directors and the producers who would be aware of it. Whether the actors are aware of it is debatable. But that's certainly, that's hard to say. Some of them may be. The answer to the question would be how familiar they are with the occult and this mysticism. The higher level they are, they may be able to spot it a mile away. Some may not. I know there's a story that I talk about that I've mentioned it on other shows, and I'll certainly mention it here, that when there was a show, I mean, obviously we all know the show, that was on in the 1990s called The X-Files. There was one of the cast members, it was one of the guys who played the lone gunman. And these were the guys who were the conspiracy buffs who helped out Mulder and Scully from time to time. It was one of those actors. I can't remember which one. But at any rate, he said he had to talk to one of the screenwriters or the producers or both of them or something about something going on with his character. And he just wanted information about the movie and things like that. And when he walked into their office, he said he was looking at their bookshelves, at this person's bookshelf. I mean, he was expecting to find books on how to write screenplays, how to write, script and direct movies. He said all the shelf was books by Aleister Crowley, Manly P. Hall, Madame Blavatsky, books on the occult, Kabbalah, numerology. He said, so he said, that really stuck out to me that these guys were fully aware of this material. And another source for this is, and it's worth mentioning is, we talk about Manly Palmer Hall. If your listeners are not familiar with that name, he was a big-time Freemason who was into the mystical arts and the mystical side of the craft and symbolism and mythology. And I want to say in the 1920s or 1930s, he founded this thing called the Philosophical Research Society, which was this giant library dedicated to the pursuit of esoteric wisdom, occult knowledge. It's a vast library. It's a stone throw from Hollywood, literally. It's literally located, literally a stone throw from the movie making industry. So you can't tell me these guys aren't familiar with this. Even some of these guys have admitted to this. I mean, George Lucas has said in numerous interviews that, he was inspired and influenced by the work of, Joseph Campbell, who's a super famous mythologist and symbolist. You will find this influence in Hollywood. And again, I just see it as really, masterful works of art, and master strokes. And to me, it's just a real challenge looking for this stuff, because the more, you deal with these masters of this stuff, like Lucas, Kubrick, Aronofsky, every time I watch one of their movies, I feel like I'm going to find something new, every time.
That I'll tell you, it's incredible, and you know this is so important, and I'm so glad that somebody like yourself takes the time out to. I mean, you must have done a lot of studying.
Well, it was really, and I'm not kidding you. You know, when I talk about this, the Royal Arch of Enoch, my first book was the product of 20 years of research, and I really applied that 20 years to movies. Is really the way for me to best describe it. So yeah, I mean, it was 20 years that I'm now applying to movies, and interpreting these movies through this symbolic lens. And I agree with you. I think it's a fascinating study. I loved writing cinema symbolism. I stand by the book. I stand by the research. I stand by the interpretations in the book. And I was so impressed with it that I'm writing Cinema Symbolism 2, its sequel, as we speak.
Oh, good. Keep them coming, and we'll keep talking about it for sure. Now, there's a 9/11 reference in the Matrix films, you say. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's I've done a couple shows where, and I certainly don't mind talking about it. There's this whole subculture out there of pointing out 9/11 references in some movies and TV shows. Some of this stuff is occurring 20 years before 9/11, so some of this I have to chalk up to coincidence to some degree. But the one in the Matrix is disturbing, and that one is hard to reconcile. I have to be honest with you. It occurs. The Matrix. Let me say this just before we get started, and I'm going to address the question. I'm not going to back away from it.
Take your time.
The Matrix movies are overloaded with symbolism. All three of them. They are decidedly Gnostic in nature. They incorporate elements. When I say Gnostic, this is what you would call mystical Christianity, almost occult Christianity. Very Gnostic in nature. A lot of numerological symbolism. The Wachowskis, I guess now I got to say brother and sister, or brother and sibling. Really overloaded those three movies, especially the first one. The first one more than the other two, but the other two have it as well. And I would just say to you and your listeners, if you ever really want to watch a Gnostic movie and just see Gnosticism on the screen, it's the first Matrix movie. I can think of no other movie that is the Gnostic religion more than the first Matrix movie. But yeah, you have this it's not noticeable. It is if you pause the movie. And it is there. Make no mistake. And it's two dates, and they both have symbolic meaning.
Well, you're going to keep me busy.
It's the scene in the first Matrix movie where Keanu Reeves is being interrogated by Smith. And by the way, let me just say this to your listeners. If you like what I'm talking about, check out the books. A shameless plug there. Please check out Royal Arch and Cinema Symbolism. I mean, again, I get much more in depth with this material in these books, so check them out. But going back to the Matrix, and again, Matrix is a movie that all three of them I diagnosed in Cinema Symbolism, and including this reference. When Anderson or Neo is being interrogated by Smith, who is Hugo Weaving, this is the scene right after they've captured him in the office complex. Smith has Anderson's file in front of him, and he's talking about how Anderson lives two lives. One is the computer hacker Neo, the other is Anderson. And this is dualism. The one versus the other. Mm-hmm. But if you look at Anderson's passport, there's two dates on it. It's his birth date and the expiration date of the passport. And I'll start with the expiration date first. The expiration date is 9/11/2001. Is when Neo's passport expires. And that is hard to reconcile, and especially it's hard to reconcile in a movie like that deals with, concepts of death and resurrection, consciousness, reawakening, destruction in order to become awakened. And there it is. His passport expires, it's the exact date. It's 9/11/2001. And like I said, it's disturbing, even for me, who am not in the boat of mind control or anything like that. That is a tough one to write off. And like I said, it's one thing to see a 9/11 reference in a movie that came out in the 1980s. I mean, that I got to chalk up to coincidence. But I mean, when you have the exact date there, I mean, it's the exact date. I mean, it's 9/11/01. That's a tough one to write off. And another, I don't want to change the subject, but it's also his birth date is of symbolic import. If you look at the passport, he was Neo or Anderson. Thomas Anderson was born on September 13th, 1971, and that date is the Attica prison riots in upstate New York, and it's dualistic. What you had going on was it's completely Gnostic. It's 100% dualistic. Where Anderson, where Neo is born on the date when the prisoners rose up but were suppressed by the state. Yet Neo it's his birthday. He's the guy who's going to free mankind from their prison-like state. That is the Matrix. So Neo's birth date is completely dualistic. It's September 13th, 1971. It's the Attica prison riots. And for Neo, it's the exact opposite. He's going to be the liberator or the, messianic savior of mankind. And then you have, on the opposite end, you have the expiration date of the passport, which is 9/11/2001. So, go figure.
Holy smokes. See, and I couldn't just write that off either. I mean, there's, coincidence, okay, to a point, but I don't know, that's a little more than coincidence in my mind anyways.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and the birth date is one thing with the Wachowskis. That's clearly intentional. I mean, you will find this other numerological symbolism going on in the Matrix movies. I mean, you just have, it's Gnostic, it's dualism, it's a lot of, good versus evil, light versus dark. This is what is generally referred to in Gnosticism as Manichaean cosmology, which for your listeners is this entire overarching universal theme of light versus darkness. Of course, this is good versus evil in Christianity, light being Jesus Christ and darkness being the devil. This, of course, you'll find this it predates Christianity. You'll find this in the religion of Zoroastrianism, light versus darkness. In the Egyptian mythology, Horus versus Set. In Christianity, it's Jesus versus the devil. But you'll find this going on in the Matrix. But yeah, you will have that numerological symbolism going on with his passport. If you watch the movie just passively, you're not going to see it. You basically have to pause the movie, and if you have a high definition TV, or Blu-ray, and you blow it up, I mean, it's definitely there without question. And it's one of the more disturbing, symbols to reconcile. No question about it.
Fabulous, and I've already got messages coming in from people who say they're going to listen to this show again and they're going to be sharing it because they're fascinated just as I am with this information. I mean, this really makes, for me, who's not really a big TV watcher or movie watcher, this really makes me want to watch some movies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, that's part of the modus operandi as well by planting this stuff in there. And appealing to our collective unconscious, the more masterful this is done, well, these are the movies that we remember, the movies that, are the archetypes that incorporate this stuff. Shining, Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, these are the movies we remember, and it's the movies that seem to have this, that, like you asked me, why is this being done? They're literally printing money off of this material, off of this arcana. So, that's one reason why it's being done is it's a way of, I mean, I don't see it as mind control per se, but it's definitely a way to, I guess the way I would say it is appeal to the collective unconscious. And I just want to say also, and not to change, I'm glad to hear that the, feedback's coming in positive. I really appreciate it. Like I said, both my books are the product of 20 years worth of research. And I'm more than happy to share, and I'm glad people, are enjoying the show tonight. And again, if you're interested, please check out the books, Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies, and The Royal Arch of Enoch. And I'll just give my website out real quick, which is www.robertwsullivaniv.com. You can go there and order all the books and ebooks and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I really appreciate coming on, and it's a fascinating subject matter. I mean, like I said, when I was doing Royal Arch, the last chapter is the movie stuff where I talked about it, and I was so impressed. I knew I wanted it to be my second book. And like I said, the book was published about a month ago, and I was so impressed with it that I'm continuing on with it with another book.
Great. And I have a question from one of our listeners here. He says the movie Percy Jackson, Sea of Monsters, the main character, Percy, has a tattoo of a trident. He says a pitched fork. What does that symbolize?
Well, the truth be told, I have to be honest, and unfortunately this does happen from time to time. You were asking me about a movie I have not seen. So I would be cautious to offer any sort of symbolic interpretation on a movie or on a symbol without seeing it in its context or anything like that. Off the top of my head, and this is just a random, this is me guesstimating. I have not seen those movies. I am somewhat familiar with them. I know they incorporate a lot of Greek mythology. Again, I have not seen them, so I want to stress that. And my gut feeling would be this might tie into the Trident of Poseidon, but that is a complete knee-jerk gut feeling. I have not watched the movie. I would have to see the tattoo. I would have to see the context it's being used in to give a proper diagnosis of it, if there even is one. And I stress that also. Sometimes, you know, there are movies that do not incorporate this imagery. I mean, I don't want people, you know, I mean, in doing these books, there are many movies I have not written about because there is nothing to them. I mean, they're good movies, don't get me wrong, but by and large, the works of Quentin Tarantino doesn't incorporate this material. A lot of the Tim Burton movies is also absent of this material. It doesn't make them less movies. It just means that, you know, these guys just don't use this, implement this material. I mean, I've watched Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction probably 24 times a piece, and I've never seen anything in either one of those movies that suggested to me that there was any sort of esoteric themes, mythology, occult iconography going on. So, I mean, there are movies without this also. I don't want people thinking that they're, you know, I'm just, you know, throwing out movies. I mean, the movies I talk about are the movies I know it's there. And believe me, I've watched a lot of movies in my life, and I've not seen it in films. But the Percy Jackson movies, or I believe that's the name of them, I have not seen them. I know they incorporate some Greek mythology. Off the top of my head, that's what I'm guessing at. But again, without having seen it, I would have to reserve an answer until I saw it.
All right, Robert, we're going to take one more break here, and then we'll come back, and you and I will finish up. I've got some more questions about some more movies here, a whole list of them, actually, and we'll try to get to some of them. So hang on with us. Okay, everybody, this is Late Night in the Midlands. I'm Michael Vera with my guest, Robert Sullivan. And again, we have him linked up on the homepage of LateNightInTheMidlands.com. So you can go right over to his website, bookmark it. This guy has 20 years of research, and you know it, because to be able to share with us what he's sharing tonight and to be able to store all this. I'll tell you, I was telling a story at the beginning of the show about that they're building a computerized brain system that's supposed to take all this knowledge and be able to wirelessly pass it to robots and keep them away from you, Robert. You might overload it. We'll be right back, everybody. And that was the wrong one. That one's old. I don't know how that got in there. The call-in number is 803-317-2264. That number that was given in that clip there was the old number from quite a while ago. So don't call that, because you won't get me. 803-317-2264 is the number. We will take calls if anybody's got questions or comments. We've got a little while longer to go here. My guest is Robert Sullivan, and what a wealth of information. And I hope you keep those books coming. I really do, because without this type of information, we couldn't do a show like this, because I don't know nearly as much about this as you do, and you've just made me want to rewatch some old movies that have collected dust here. That's for sure.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, I'll keep the books coming. I got 2 out now, and more on the way.
All right. Now, another movie, Back to the Future.
Oh, good God. We won't have time.
Well, it's got, what is it? Numerology, I guess, right?
Well, you have what you have. This is one of the more complex movie trilogies. You have a lot of Egyptian numerological symbols going on, and if you have to understand a lot about solarism and Egyptian mythology to understand the Back to the Future trilogies. Part one especially. I'll get into it briefly. We won't have time to get into all of it.
Okay.
But it's okay. No, I do the three Back to the Future trilogy, or the three movies in the Cinema Symbolism book. But it's a lot of Egyptian mythology, where you have concepts relating to Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And of course, this is the Egyptian family, as it were. And their archenemy is this character known as Set, or Typhon, who is the enemy of the Sun family. Of course, Osiris is the sun. He's killed and resurrected. And then you have Horus, who is the solar child. And of course, you'll find this paralleled in the Back to the Future movie, where you have George McFly, who is the sun father, Osiris, who is killed by Set, or Typhon, who is Biff Tannen in Back to the Future. He's the archenemy of the Sun family. You have the Virgin Mother Isis, who is Lorraine Baines, the wife. And of course, when Marty goes back in time, she confuses the two sun gods for each other. She falls in love with Horus, who is the solar replacement for Osiris, where she should be falling in love with Osiris. She gets this confused. And then you have the sun child, who of course is the hero of the thing, is Marty McFly. And you will find solar symbolism surrounding the chariot, the sun chariot in comparative religion. Horus's equivalent is Apollo, the sun god, who drives a solar chariot. And you will find, the sun reference with the DeLorean that spits flames, when it breaks the space-time continuum at 88 miles an hour. The sun reference is very adroitly concealed in Back to the Future Part 1, where in order to activate the sun chariot, in order to activate the solar chariot, to get the sun child, Horus or Marty, back to the future, the lightning strikes the clock tower at 10:04 at night, and this number 10:04 is drilled into our head over and over again. And of course, 10:04 is not only the time, but it's an esoteric reference to the date of October 4th. And October 4th is the 265th day, the 265th day of the solar calendar, which means there are exactly 88 days left of the sun. This is why the DeLorean has to hit 88 miles an hour to activate the sun. This is why the lightning strikes the clock tower at 10:04. It's a giant sun reference to get the sun chariot and the sun child back to the future. You have a lot of numerological symbolism going around with the Doc Brown character. He is surrounded by, and there's more to this in the book. I'm just glazing over this as lightly as possible, because you really have to have a deep understanding of Egyptian mythology to properly diagnose this thing, which I do in the book, but I'm just lightly going over it here. But in a nutshell, with the Doc Brown character, you have the number 5 that surrounds him constantly. He invents the flux capacitor on November 5th of 1955, and this reflects the 5th card of the tarot, known as the Hierophant. And if you read Aleister Crowley's interpretation of the card, the Hierophant is the master of space and time. This is why Brown is the master of space and time. And then again, you have the little dog Einstein, who is the world's first time traveler. This is, of course, and this isn't really esoteric, but it is neat to mention, is a reference to Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein was, of course, the guy who developed the theory of relativity. So it's appropriate that, which allows for time travel, that the world's first time traveler is the dog Einstein. This occurs at 1:21 a.m. at the Twin Pines Mall. 121 is a reference to the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity needed to fire up the sun chariot. It's a long story, but the entire concept of the theory of relativity comes out of a treatise that was published in the year 1640. And this is where Doc Brown lives, in 1640 Riverside. It's a reference to the date of 1640. I forget the name of the treatise that was published, but it has to do with Euclidean mathematics and departure of space-time and departure of the space-time continuum. So Brown's address is 1640 Riverside, a reference to the date of 1640. Yeah, Back to the Future. All three of them have it. Esoteric symbolism and occult iconography and numerology in them. A lot of Egyptian mythology. Biff Tannen as this dark god Typhon, and of course his last name is Tannen. Typhon, all but phonetically the same. If you think I'm stretching this, when Biff Tannen in part 2 of Back to the Future, he drives around in the Luxor cab company. Of course, this is a reference to Luxor, Egypt. Which is where, of course, the Egyptian mysteries originate. So you have a lot of Egyptian mythology going on with the Back to the Future, a lot of solar mythology going on with Back to the Future trilogies. They're great movies and just a lot of unique esoterica contained in those movies. Those are 3 movies that I dissect much more in depth than I'm talking about right now in the book Cinema Symbolism.
Nice. So there's another one that I'm going to have to go back and watch again, because I remember back when that movie came out, I watched it and, I was very well entertained, but never knew anything about the symbolism. Now, somebody from our listening audience asked about the movie E.T.
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, Spielberg incorporates the ET thing is kind of neat, because the ET material it doesn't actually have to do with the movie itself, and you'll find this also. It's a unique study. I talk about it much more in Cinema Symbolism too. Spielberg and Lucas and so is Zemeckis, are grand masters of this stuff. E.T. itself, you have the whole government conspiracy thing, the E.T., the extraterrestrial, the government's after him. I mean, that's really not veiled imagery in the movie. I've seen the movie lots of times. I don't really find any numerological esoteric imagery, save one thing, and it is unique, worth talking about, and it's actually not in the movie. It is in the movie, but it's more known. It's the movie poster. Which is when it happens in the movie. I shouldn't say it doesn't happen in the movie, where if you look at the movie poster, it's in the movie where the little boy, Elliot, I think, has cut his hand, and E.T. has the glowing tip finger and is reaching in and heals the hand. If you look at the movie poster, that's the image. It's the hand reaching, it's the extraterrestrial hand reaching in with the little boy's hand. This is, if you know your religious art, this is the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. Is the movie poster of God touching Adam's hand. So you have the E.T., the extraterrestrial, touching the hand of a little boy. Oh. If you look at the movie poster and you look at Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel and of God touching Adam, it's the exact same artwork. And of course, you get into the concept of it maybe implying the extraterrestrial origins of mankind. Certainly that's what the symbolism seems to be implying. And it's a good question to ask. Because, we've been talking about during the show, the symbolism contained in the movies themselves, this hidden iconography, these hidden themes, these hidden, alchemical, we've been talking about the whole night. I want to point out, and I talk about this in the book as well, there are situations where I document where the casting of an actor can be occult in nature, and believe it or not, I've actually documented the release date of a movie can be occult and esoteric in nature. So and another study is, and this is again something I'm talking about more in Cinema Symbolism too, is, movie posters, the artwork, surrounding a film can have hidden themes, hidden iconography in it, as well. It's an interesting subject matter. And again, if you take a look at the E.T. poster, take a look at the Michelangelo Sistine Chapel, with God creating Adam, it's the exact same artwork.
So some might look at it as a message that, E.T. had something to do with mankind, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of interpreting it, certainly.
All right. I'm really interested in these extraterrestrial type movies like Star Wars. Now, was there something specific with Luke Skywalker?
Right, right. With Star Wars, I dissect all 6 of the Star Wars movies in the Cinema Symbolism book. Again, this ties into a lot of Egyptian mythology, a lot of Joseph Campbell mythology. The works of, George Lucas's Star Wars is based on the works of a man named Joseph Campbell, and his seminal work is a book called A Hero of a Thousand Faces, or A Hero with a Thousand Faces. I've heard it pronounced both ways, or I've seen it both ways. And what this is the hero with a thousand faces, for lack of a better word, is the solar hero. And what it documents is that the hero's the sun, then this is his solar journey, and there are certain things that will always happen to him on this journey. You will find these elements and components in the Star Wars movies, specifically the first 3 trilogies. You will find elements of these in the Matrix films. You will also find elements of these in the Lord of the Rings movies, the Harry Potter material, and the C.S. Lewis Narnia movies as well. So if the hero or the heroine even is a solar allegory, the monomyth, or what Campbell talks about in A Hero with a Thousand Faces, is these certain things that always happen to the solar hero. So in Star Wars, and again, this ties into some Egyptian solar mythology, you have Luke Skywalker, who is the sun hero, who is going to be the messianic savior of the universe. This is Neo in the Matrix, who is the messianic savior of mankind from the machines. This is Frodo Baggins in Lord of the Rings, who's going to be the savior of Middle Earth. I mean, it's the Christ figure, for lack of a better word. But Luke Skywalker, just look at his name. Luke comes from lux, the Latin for light. What light skywalks? The sun. You have Luke Skywalker lives on Tatooine, which has 2 sons. Tatooine births 2 sons, Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker. And Anakin Skywalker also has these same Christ-like attributes around him as well. So you have these 2 solar figures being born on a planet with 2 suns. The name Luke Skywalker literally means light walking across the sky, the sun, and of course, going back to ancient religion, Apollo is the premier sun god. Apollo is also Helios. Apollo in the Egyptian mysteries is Horus. Horus battles Set or Typhon, who is Biff Tannen in Back to the Future. In Star Wars, Set or Seth becomes the Sith, who are the Lords of Darkness, Darth Vader, the Emperor, Darth Maul. These are the Lords of Darkness, the Sith Lords or Seth Lords. This again ties into Egyptian mythology. Again, Horus is the Egyptian sun god. His Greco-Roman equivalent is Apollo. Oh, by the way, Apollo happens to have a sister who is the moon. So, of course, Luke Skywalker or Apollo has Princess Leia, who wears the white robes of the moon. So you will have this whole Egyptian, solar, lunar, Sabian motifs going on in the Star Wars movies. And again, you have in the Campbell work, in the works of Joseph Campbell, and again, specifically The Hero with a Thousand Faces, you will have these elements that happen to the sun hero. I'm just off the top of my head, I document it much more in the book, but you have things where the hero gets supernatural aid. This occurs in Star Wars where Luke gets the the lightsaber from Obi-Wan. There's an element called Trapped in the Belly of the Whale. This is when the hero has to fight his way out of some sort of eternal dungeon of some kind. Of course, in Star Wars, this is the trash compactor scene, where they have to battle their way out of the Death Star, the bowels of the Death Star. You'll find these elements also in Lord of the Rings and the Matrix and, the Harry Potter material as well. It's again, if the hero's the sun, the monomyth is his solar allegory or his solar adventure, I guess is a better way for me to say it. And you'll find these elements in Star Wars. The first 3 have it. You will find occultism in the other 3 Star Wars movies. This would be episodes 1, 2, and 3. You'll find it again in the Matrix, in the Lord of the Rings. I document it much more in the book. So please check out the book. And again, this stuff is all in there. And, Lucas has said on numerous occasions that, Campbell was a huge fan, influence upon him. So, definitely check out the book. to learn more about the esoteric and mysticism of the Star Wars movies.
It kind of reminds me of like the story in religious texts, you know, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then you've got Darth Vader, the Father, Luke Skywalker, the Son, and I don't know, Obi-Wan Kenobi was there to guide him even after he died.
Right. Where you have in the concept of Father, the Son, and Holy Ghost is another solar icon. If you read the works of a Jesuit priest named Athanasius Kircher, you know, the God the Father is the sun at dawn, you know, coming over the horizon, being the godlike figure. He's the youthful sun at dawn, being, you know, God the Son at dawn, being the youthful sun, and then descends into the, you know, mysterious afterworld at dusk, being the Holy Ghost. So the whole concept of the Trinity of, you know, and this is again the triple division of government in the Blue Lodge. Anytime you see triple, you know, things like this, you know, think, you know, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. It's the movement of the sun. And again, you'll find these solar iconography, you know, within the Star Wars movies. The Kenobi character is interesting. This is the hermit wizard character, who is a character known as Hermes Trismegistus, who is the god of magic and wizardry and things like that. I shouldn't say things like that. He's the god of magic and sorcery and wizardry. He is Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is the old graybeard character in film, is Hermes Trismegistus. This is the character who possesses all the wisdom, but doles it out piecemeal. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. This is Yoda in Empire. This is Gandalf the Grey in Lord of the Rings. I mean, they all have this character. The guy who's sort of the wizard archetype who helps the solar figure along the way. But he has all the knowledge, but he only gives it out when he needs to, knows the truth about everything, but again, will only divulge it piecemeal. I mean, you know, Gandalf the Grey, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, Morpheus in Matrix, Albus Dumbledore in Harry Potter. It's the old graybeard. He's a favorite, you know, kind of easy to spot. But yeah, when I have a whole chapter in the book of Hermes Trismegistus in film, the wizard archetype, and I even get into the concept of the evil wizard archetype, the anti-Hermes Trismegistus. You'll find that in film. The two that mainly come to mind are Thulsa Doom in Conan the Barbarian and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, who is the evil wizard. Willy Wonka possesses all the occult secrets of candy making, but won't give them up to save his life and likes to torture little children.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Now, there's a few others that I'd like to ask you about. We've got about another, I guess, 20 minutes. The Exorcist.
Right. That's a good one. I was listening and I heard the tubular bells in the background for one of your promos, which is the theme music to The Exorcist. Yeah, The Exorcist is unique. This is a movie that I dissect in cinema symbolism. It's actually the first chapter of the book. And you have a lot of mysticism going on and a lot of subliminal imagery going on in The Exorcist. You have concepts of what you have, what I would call, and it's a tongue twister. I'll explain what I'm talking about. Is things such as Kabbalistic apotheosis, and what I mean by that when I say Kabbalistic, I'm talking about Hebrew Kabbalah, which is alchemy. Which incorporates a lot of mysticism and change and alchemy. And when I say apotheosis, I'm talking about becoming godlike. And what you have going on in The Exorcist, this surrounds the Father Karras character, who is the Christ-like savior of the little girl. He's her own personal Jesus. This is symbolically told to you on the screen by Friedkin. Father Karras is constantly shown in a state of ascension, going up steps, constantly moving upward. This is symbolizing becoming Christ-like, becoming, what I would call, Gnostic Ascensio, having this awakening. He's going to be, for him, it's more of apotheosis than it is awakening. He's going to become her personal savior. So Karras is constantly in a state of moving upwards. This is told to you by Friedkin immediately when you are introduced to Father Karras. He is coming up onto a subway platform. and the sign behind him is 33rd Street. And of course, 33rd is the date of Jesus' years on earth. Jesus was 33 years old when he was crucified. So by putting the number of 33 behind Karis and putting him in an upward state as he is during the whole movie, you are identifying Karis as this Christ-like savior of the little girl, which he ultimately turns out to be. He is the one who exorcises the demon from the little girl. But in doing so, and this permeates the whole movie, Karis throughout the whole movie is in a state of doubt. He doubts Christianity. He doubts his own religion. So when he dies by exorcising the demon, he's successful, but he falls down the flight of steps at the end. And this is symbolizing his downfall, that ultimately he does succeed in exorcising the demon, but he was a doubter the entire time, thus he falls down the steps, symbolizing his doubt and his ultimate death and his downfall. But we know the exorcism is successful. How do we know that? Friedkin tells us symbolically, when Karis is laying there dying at the bottom of the steps, you will see the word in graffiti pigs written next to him. This is referencing the gospel tales of Jesus successfully exorcising a series of demons from a man and casting them into a herd of pigs. And then Jesus ordered the pigs off a cliff to be killed. So when you see the word pigs there, that's a reference to the gospel tale of Jesus exorcising the pigs. So we know the exorcism was successful. And again, you will have Karis constantly moving upwards. And then again, Friedkin does something that's really interesting, and this is carried forward in The Shining as well, where you have evil being introduced into Georgetown and into the McNeil family at Halloween. He doesn't tell you that. He doesn't flash Halloween 1973 across the screen, but we know this is the case because when Chris McNeil is walking home from filming the movie, she's accosted by a series of trick-or-treaters. So we know the date is Halloween. Halloween symbolizes the dark half of the year. Halloween falls on when it does is because that is the halfway point between the equinoxes, between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. This is known as the darker half, when the evil spirits are free to roam and the darker half of the year is allowed to take over. Obviously, the days are shorter, darkness reigns. Hence, Friedkin is symbolically telling you the darkness, night, is symbolically entering Georgetown, entering the McNeil family by identifying the date of Halloween as McNeil walks home. We talked about The Shining earlier in the film. Stanley Kubrick does this exact same thing, and no one notices it. The Torrance family, Jack, Wendy, and Danny, actually move into the Overlook on Halloween. And again, it's the same symbology. It's the darker half. It's the evil spirits now beginning to roam the corridors of the hotel when the days are shorter and night's exalted. How do we know that? Does Stanley Kubrick ever tell you or flash the date of Halloween across the screen? No. Stuart Ullman, when Jack Torrance is meeting with him, tells you that the hotel's season runs from May the 1st to October 30th. He says October 30th is the last day we're open. Hence, you know that when the Torrance family moves in, it's the day after October 30th, Halloween, and it's the same symbology going on in The Exorcist. Darkness is now entering Georgetown. So you have that going on within The Exorcist. You have the character of Father Marin. He is paralleling a real-life Jesuit priest known as Athanasius Kircher, who wrote about the mysteries of Christianity. And to Kircher, he believed Christianity was more Egyptian in origin than it was. I believe the term he used was Christianity's origins lay along the Nile River, not along the Jordans. But Kirchner was big time into investigating, digs and ruins to locate Christianity's origins. You'll find this with Marin digging up the pagan site at the very beginning, trying to discover Christianity's, quote unquote pagan origins. You have the Jesuit priest, investigating the pagan origins. This comes straight out of the history of the Jesuits with this Jesuit priest named Athanasius Kircher. And then, just on a, light versus dark level, you have the little girl being possessed by the darkness, the evil spirit. So what do? You call in the two sun priests. the Jesuits. The emblem for the Jesuits is the sun, so you're symbolically invoking the sun, the two sun priests, what I call in the book the Catholic Church's solar magisterium, the Society of Jesus. They're the, sort of the Marines, the sun priests who come in to drive out the darkness, to invoke the sun and drive out the darkness from the little girl. And you have a lot more going on in The Exorcist, some real unique symbology going on with scenes. I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to give the whole book away. But yeah, The Exorcist is the first chapter of the book, and it's a lot going on in The Exorcist regarding, concepts of apotheosis and just mysticism and, solar symbolism. It's a great movie. It's one of my all-time favorite movies, and definitely check it out.
Incredible. Now, I did read about a Superman movie from 1978, and I've grown up being a Superman fan and a Batman fan, so I definitely would like to hit on those two before we're done tonight.
Right. Well, the Batman mythology is more mythological and psychological. I'll start with Batman. I'll go to Superman. Superman is another Jesus Christ figure. The Batman mythology has to do with a lot of Jungian psychology, conscious ego versus shadow self. For Bruce Wayne, it's the Bruce Wayne personality versus the darker self, which is Batman. But the Batman character is his real persona. The guy who invented Batman was a man by the name of Bob Kane. This is where the name Bruce Wayne comes from. It's just a parody of the name Bob Kane. You obviously have the anti-Batman character, who is the Joker, who is the devil character. You have the female trickster villain, who is Lilith, who is this female trickster goddess of mythology. This is obviously Catwoman. The Two-Face character, who is the district attorney, who has the split face. That's the Roman god Janus, who had a split face, who had two faces. So with Batman, you have a lot of, he also embodies the concept of, the Christ figure, the Savior. He's constantly referred to as the Savior archetype, or the Savior of Gotham City. To summon Batman, you have to, use the sun. You have to use the solar beacon, the bat signal. So you have to invoke the sun to draw out the Savior figure to save Gotham from these, evil, supervillains. You have, Poison Ivy is the evil, Mother archetype. Gaia reversed almost. If Gaia is Mother Earth, she's the evil Mother Nature. So you'll have a lot going on with mythology with Batman. Superman is great. Another Savior archetype, another Christ-like figure, sent, the only begotten Son, sent to planet Earth with magical powers to save mankind from itself and to teach mankind how to be humane and live with justice and to be kind with each other. And Superman uses his supernatural powers, like Jesus has these supernatural, remarkable powers sent by his, is the only begotten son of his parents, sent to planet Earth with these powers to save mankind from itself. Superman in the 1978 movie, actually resurrects the dead, like Jesus resurrects Osiris. Superman brings, Lois Lane back to life. In the one they just released, my goodness gracious.
If I could, the last one that they had released, that's the message I got from it without even knowing about most of this stuff at the time. Is that he was like a god. He was sent down to a virgin mother. Well, not so much a virgin, but a mother who couldn't bear her own children, and she just happens to find him, and he's sent down there to be the protector of Earth, and
right, absolutely. In the one they just released, Man of Steel, he's on Earth before he reveals himself to be Superman. How old is he on Earth? He's 33 years old. Oh, who else was 33 years old? Oh, Jesus. It's the same story. And you will constantly see in Man of Steel Jesus. I'm calling him Jesus. Superman leaves the one spaceship cruciform and flies in front of the sun. And of course, you get the whole solar allegory with the New Testament, with Jesus being the Son, S-U-N. I mean, even, my goodness gracious, in Man of Steel, Russell Crowe tells Clark or Jor-El, he says, you're gonna teach the Earthlings to be one with the sun. I mean, it's just all over the place in Man of Steel. But yeah, I mean, Superman's another one of these guys. You know, the Christ Savior archetype, you know, is on screen. Superman is one of them. I mean, I'll just briefly, Anakin Skywalker, is the Christ-like messianic savior of the Jedis, who is virgin birth, is misunderstood by the temple elders, wants to use his powers to stop people from dying, is dead and resurrected as Darth Vader, and storms the temple. I mean, boy, doesn't that sound familiar? Wow. You know, you have in The Green Mile, John Coffey, JC, who dies for the sins of the South, and resurrects the little mouse. He can bring things back to life. JC, James or John Coffey, he's the Christ-like figure, and again, he dies for the sins of the South. 12 Monkeys, 12 Houses of the Zodiac, 12 Apostles, James Cole, JC, is assisted by the woman, Catherine Raleigh, Mary Magdalene. She's the only one who believes him. You know, he's the savior of mankind, to go back in time to save mankind from the deadly virus. He's killed and resurrected at the end of the movie when he watches himself die as a little boy. I mean, it's the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and I didn't like what they did to Superman last time. They had him, you know, he gets Lois pregnant, knocks her up, she has a baby, he leaves for 5 years, and hangs around in space, and then finally comes back. You know, it's like almost like, you know, even Superman does it. It's okay.
Yeah, well, I think that's the one from the middle of the 2000s called Superman Returns.
Yes.
Yeah, well, watch Man of Steel if you want to see Superman as Jesus Christ. Watch the one with Russell Crowe and
yeah, I seen that one too. I kind of mixed them up there, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that really shows Superman as Jesus Christ. I mean, he is constantly flying around cruciform in front of the sun. Russell Crowe says you're going to teach the humans to be one with the sun. Yeah, I mean, he's on Earth 33 years. I mean, boy, that's a real dead giveaway. Yeah, lots of going. I do more of the Superman stuff in cinema symbolism too. But no, you're spot on. It's a Christ-like savior archetype. Superman, Clark Kent, no doubt about it.
Yeah, incredible. Now, one of our listeners asked about Harry Potter. So if you want to touch on that for a couple minutes.
Well, again, I'm just going to go over it briefly. This is something I'm talking about in cinema symbolism too. I was originally going to do the Harry Potter material for cinema symbolism, the book that's out now. It was too much. I couldn't take on 8 movies, but it's the same thing again. You know, where you have the Hermes Trismegistus character, which is Dumbledore. You have the Sun Child, you know, the hero, the messianic savior, Harry Potter, who's going to, you know, against the, you know, agents of darkness, which is Voldemort. You know, and Harry Potter, like all, you know, a lot of these guys is dead and resurrected, as Harry Potter is. You got a lot of astrological tie-ins with Harry Potter, with the Harry Potter characters. A lot of the names, Sirius, Regulus, Bellatrix. The most famous is probably Draco Malfoy. Draco is the great serpent and the great dragon in the sky, the constellation Draco. And of course, Draco Malfoy goes into Slytherin Hall, which is the serpent. So yeah, you have a lot of astrological esoterica going on with Harry Potter. I talk about it briefly in cinema symbolism, but I'm doing all 8 of the Harry Potter movies in cinema symbolism 2, which I am working on right now.
Nice. Now, even the Smurfs?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to wrap up the show. I just had someone else asking me about this the other night. Yeah, the Smurfs. What a lot of people ask me about is I usually get asked about the Walt Disney material. How a lot of that is very dark and mysterious, yet it's directed for children. And it is. But with the Disney material, you can't lay all of it at the doorstep of Walt Disney. A lot of his stories are based on, you know, the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales. But you know, if you want to see you know, arcane themes in children's shows, look no further than the Smurfs, which is just one gigantic political allegory. The Smurfs themselves are the perfect communist society. They all work without pay. They all live rent free. They all live in the same housing. All their housing's identical. They all wear the same clothing. They all, you know, Papa Smurf is Karl Marx. He looks like him. He wears the red of the communists.
And
he wears the red free.
If I may, I believe they were created by a wizard, were they not?
No, I'll get into this in a minute.
Oh, okay.
No, the Papa Smurf is the Karl Marx character, the benign, de facto Stalinist ruler of the Smurfs. They all do their jobs without pay, but they live rent-free. They all wear the same costumes. They all wear the same uniform. They all live in the exact same housing. Papa Smurf is Karl Marx. He looks like him. He wears the red of the communists. He wears the red Phrygian hat of the sans culottes, which are the proto-Marxists from the French Revolution. Their archenemy is this evil wizard called Gargamel. They're the communists on a darker level. Gargamel is Nazi Germany. On a more exoteric level, he's the West. He's obsessed with materialism. And the first time Gargamel is introduced, he's trying to transmute gold. He's trying to use the Philosopher's Stone to make gold or material wealth. But yeah, what Gargamel does is, to undermine the Smurfs' perfect communist society, he goes into his satanic book of spells, which he keeps in his castle keep. And of course, this is paralleling the Nazi stronghold of Wewelsburg, where Himmler had this keep, where he kept all the, magical artifacts for the SS. He grabs his great book of spells and he takes a lump of clay and uses Hebrew black magic and this is Frankenstein's monster. He creates what's called a Kabbalistic golem. Out of this lump of clay, he imbues it with human life. This is what Dr. Frankenstein does with Frankenstein's monster. And out of this lump of clay is born Smurfette, who outside of Frankenstein's monster is probably one of in the top 10 most famous Kabbalistic golems ever created. And Smurfette's sole mission is seek and destroy. He sends her into the Smurfs' perfected communist village to establish a fifth column. She is sent there to destroy the Smurfs from within, and she almost succeeds at this. But then Papa Smurf catches wind of what Gargamel is trying to do, and he uses the white magic to turn Smurfette into the Smurfette we all know and love with the blonde hair, and turns her into a real Smurf. So a lot of political allegory with the Smurfs, a lot of magic, a lot of sorcery. People always want to talk about Walt Disney. I think a lot of stuff going on in the Smurfs makes the Walt Disney material look somewhat like child's play. Although I have to be honest with you, in Cinema Symbolism 2, I have a whole chapter on Walt Disney. There is a lot of very mystical, arcane themes going on in the Walt Disney movies, and when we talked about this already in the show, the National Treasure movies, parts 1 and 2, are both Walt Disney movies.
And with the Smurfs too, I kind of wonder. You've got all males, you've got one female. They don't seem to reproduce, right? So it would seem like it's, I don't know, like
well, yeah, there's some stuff I think they even have to leave out of children's shows. They just kind of all hang out together, and they work. They all till the land. They all, it's the Marxist doctrine, whatever it is, each according to his own, each according to his needs, to his each their own, or whatever it is. I should write that saying down. But it's the Marxist doctrine. It's basically what the Smurfs are. They all work. They all live rent free, but they all do what they're capable of, and they all take what they need and are afforded their own needs. So yeah, it's literally the perfect communist society. The Marxist society is the Smurfs.
Fantastic. And Robert, I'm going to have you back really soon, but I'd like to have you back on another show that I do with Ryan Gable, The Last Frequency. Would love to get you on there and talk about some of the new kid shows and maybe some of the stuff we didn't get a chance to talk about tonight. I'm fascinated by this and fascinated by the work that you've done the last 20 years, and I appreciate it. And I want to give you the floor to get out any information that you'd like for the next few minutes, and I thank you so much.
Well, for starters, let me say thank you, Mike, for having me on. I sincerely appreciate it. I thought it was a fantastic show. I would love to come on your other show with Ryan. I was on The Secret Teachings, I want to say about a month and a half ago, and I got your email. So I'll send you an email tomorrow, and maybe, you know, in the next month or so we can, you know, I don't want to, you know, your shows to cannibalize one another, but maybe in the next month or so we can set something up. I'll shoot you something tomorrow, you know, right around the holiday, you know, if tomorrow or right then after, and we'll set something up. But again, let me say thank you for letting me be on your show. I really appreciate it. Yes, if you were interested in what I was talking about tonight, and you wanted more information on me or how to buy my books, the easiest way is please go to my website, which is www.robertwsullivaniv.com. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. So my website is just my name. It's www.robertwsullivan with 2 L's, iv.com. There's a banner there to buy my books. If you want the signed copies of Cinema Symbolism and Royal Arch of Enoch, you have to buy those through my publisher. They're sold exclusively there. The books, all the books are in the Kindle form. They're in the Apple iBookstore. They are in the Barnes & Noble Nook. You can find that at my publisher's website as well. If you just go to my website, right there on the banner, it will take you there. This material, my books are also on Amazon, the Amazon Kindle, the Barnes & Noble Nook. You can purchase them, you know, from there. If you go to Amazon.com, you can find the Kindle there. You can find the paperbacks there, but they won't be signed. But if you want the Kindle, and all the ebooks, that's all readily available. Just again, go to my website, www.robertwsullivaniv, that's the letter I, the letter V.com. And again, just real quick, there's links there to all my social media, information about me, links to my YouTube channel where you can watch, you know, and listen to other podcasts and radio shows I've been on, watch some videos I produced talking about this material, links to my Twitter account, my Facebook like pages, Royal Arch of Enoch, Cinema Symbolism, even Cinema Symbolism 2, all have Facebook like pages. Twitter, all this social media is routinely updated. You can check there, my website, again, for events and appearances, radio shows I'm going to be on. And again, there's a page there called Buy Rob's Books, and there's links there to buy all the books in the paperback forms, signed copies, because I've been getting emails about I get emails pretty regularly. I want a signed copy. I want a signed copy. If you want the signed copy, you got to go to my website. It's not on Amazon. It's www.robertwsullivaniv.com. They are sold exclusively through my publisher. You'll find the link there. And again, if you want the ebooks, they're a lot cheaper. It's on the Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble Nook, Apple iBookstore, robertwsullivaniv.com. Check it out. And, you know, again, links to all the social media, Twitter. And thank you, Mike, for having me on Late Night in the Midlands. I thought it was a fantastic show. I really appreciate you having me on and giving me the time to talk about me, my research, and my books. And I just want to say thank you.
Oh, and I thank you dearly. And I absolutely enjoyed tonight's show.
Stuff going on, in Washington D.C., for example, with some of the sacred architecture, the sacred geometry, the astrological architecture, and it invokes both Blue Lodge and high degree Freemasonry. There are several reasons why it's being done. Like when you're talking about like the astrological, alignments and things like that, the idea is that by aligning your building to the stars, certain constellations, you're symbolically drawing down divinity to Earth. The idea is that because the stars, the planets, the constellations are closer to God in heaven than we are, you're drawing down heaven on Earth. This comes from the work of a Renaissance, a medieval Christian mystic named Raymond Lully. This philosophy was also carried forward by a Dominican friar named Giordano Bruno. This is what is also known as the Hermetic maxim of as above, so below. So by doing things like that, and again, like by incorporating Royal Arch, Masonic symbolism, it's this degree that the name of God is recovered. So again, you're sort of investing the symbol or the the icon with God, divinity, concepts of sacred notions relating to a supreme being, I guess would be one way of saying it, and to kind of carry this forward a little bit, because I get asked this routinely when I talk about the movie symbolism. It's the same sort of question: is why is this being placed there? It's the same sort of concept. I think a lot of times that these movie makers are putting this mythology and these symbols on the screen. What they're trying to do is, it is the same thing with sacred architecture, with incorporating things like the golden ratio, Vesica Pisces, things like that, is you're turning the movie with a piece of celluloid into this, work of, this masterful, piece of art, basically. It's a transformative process where instead of watching just, a movie, you're actually viewing this sort of Kabbalistic alchemical experience that can, actually effectuate your emotions. So that's kind of the way I see it. Some people see it as forms of mind control. I kind of don't go down that path. But, the symbolism, the incorporation of this stuff, it gets a bad rap. Sometimes people see it as evidence of this demonic conspiracy. I don't see it that way at all. And especially when you're dealing with things like the United States of America, which in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, I have a whole chapter on this. The chapter's called the United States of Freemasonry. I basically say the United States is a Masonic republic, and as such, it incorporates and uses a lot of the symbols, both actual symbols and some of the philosophical lessons going on with Freemasonry, and being taught within Freemasonry, both Blue Lodge and High Degree, being used in things like city designing, architecture, symbols on colleges, universities. So yeah, you'll find it all over the place. Again, I don't really see it as sinister, but it's definitely there. Some people do, but I see it as more of a sort of kind of divine enlightenment being employed by the use of this material.
So it's not a sign that the Jews or the Masons or the Illuminati is running the entire world?
Well, that's the way a lot of people see it. I mean, I don't really see it that way. I see it as more of the guys who are creating the United States, going back to the founding fathers. People like DeWitt Clinton were all Freemasons, and they were very impressed with the teachings of it. So they use it in things like city planning, in architecture. You'll find it in colleges and universities. This comes out of the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial, where it's the restoration of lost wisdom. So, if you're restoring knowledge and wisdom, yeah, you would incorporate it into maybe a logo or a coat of arms on a college or university. So, I don't shy away from this either. And when you get into the early days of the country, there is a definite strong Illuministic influence going on. So you can see icons associated with the Illuminati on this stuff. But I see it more as people using it on their own unilaterally because they're impressed with it. Then I see some sort of hidden hand directing people to use it. That being said, yeah, I mean, the use of this material is overwhelming. So, either people are using it or, Freemasonry is, people are either using the emblems and philosophies of Freemasonry, but, maybe there is some sort of hidden hand going on within Freemasonry. I've been involved with it for almost 20 years now. I've never seen anything. But you will find a lot of Masonic influence, higher degree ritual known as the Royal Arch Ceremonial, the Royal Arch of Enoch. In the Scottish Rite, it's also called the Royal Arch of Solomon. In the York Rite, it's called the Royal Arch of Zerubbabel. Was incorporating elements of the Book of Enoch, which shouldn't be happening. The ritual was being developed in the 1740s, 1750s. And the Book of Enoch, one Enoch, was lost to history from around the 2nd century, 3rd century AD, all the way up until 1773, when a man named James Bruce returned to Europe with copies from Ethiopia. Those copies remained untranslated in the basement of the Bodleian Library at Oxford University until 1821. So this book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, presented this historical anomaly, talks a lot about the history of Freemasonry, why this degree is so important, a lot of the symbology, the philosophies coming out of it, how they were shaping material culture, the United States of America. I got into the whole Masonic architecture of things like Washington, D.C., things going on in New York State, New York City, the Statue of Liberty. I'm sorry?
Oh no, I'm listening. You might be
Okay, no,
getting
I'm
a little
sorry. There must
feedback.
have been a little bit of feedback.
Yeah.
But and things like the Erie Canal, things going on in New York, things going on in Baltimore, Maryland, and the book came out, and what I did was, when the Royal Arch of Enoch, I brought this sort of up to modern day by, in the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch, I talked about Masonic, Enochian, solar symbolisms going on in some popular movies that I clearly had seen. Most notably, things like the National Treasure movie, the very first one, is a retelling of the Royal Arch ceremonial. It's the location of the Masonic treasure vault beneath the Holy Ground, which is the Royal Arch ritual. Masonic elements turn up in National Treasure 2. Movies like Excalibur, which is by and large a solar allegory. Things like the Da Vinci Code, which is basically a shrine to the number 13. Things like that. And you know, this was documented in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. It's the final chapter. And what happened was, there was a lot of other movies that I wanted to talk about that incorporated this sort of Kabbalistic, numerological, astrological, mythological underpinnings, themes, concepts going on in them. And of course, it didn't really fit into the Royal Arch of Enoch book. Cinema Symbolism is about 470 pages long. So what I did was, immediately when Royal Arch of Enoch was published,
on here tonight. All right, so we're going to bring Robert Sullivan on with us and get this train traveling. Hello, Robert. How are you tonight? This is Michael.
I'm well. How are you?
I am doing just fine, and it is a pleasure to have you back.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being on. Thank you for having me back on Late Night in the Midlands, Mike. It's much appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the appreciation's really on my end because you're taking time out to help us better understand something that I got to say that most people probably don't know nearly as much about as you do. And I appreciate that.
Well, sure. It's great to be here.
All right. Well, Robert, if we could start, maybe you could start by telling us what drove you to the work that you do, and how did it all start? Where did you start with all this?
Right. Sure. Well, the book that I currently published, which is basically a month old, Cinema Symbolism, that was born out of a book that I wrote and was published 2 years ago, called The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism. Just briefly, that book began for me when I was an associate student at Oxford University back in 1992, 1993. I spent my junior year abroad there. And it was really there that I got introduced to the works of Francis Yates, the impact of the Hermetic tradition on material society, secret societies, things like that. There was a lot of research I started doing, reading these books. I became a Freemason in 1997 in Amicable St. John's Lodge number 25 here in Baltimore, Maryland. I became a 32nd degree in the Scottish Rite here in Baltimore as well in 1999. And I continued writing the books and doing the research. And it really wasn't until around 2005, 2006 that I really began to put pen to paper with this thing. And this is the first book I published called The Royal Arch of Enoch, which I was on your show, I think, about a year ago, actually, talking about this. But I'll just go over it briefly again.
Thank you.
And this book presents, it's a 700-page book, and it presents this historical anomaly going on that was never before documented, that this particular, I started writing Cinema Symbolism, a guide to esoteric imagery in popular movies, all but immediately. And it's really, for lack of a better word, a continuation of the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch. And this book was published about a month ago. It's brand new. And it documents, again, these sort of, mythological, numerological, Kabbalistic, alchemical, mystical symbols, and iconography being placed in popular movies. And it's really unique. It's a fascinating study because I'm 100% convinced the material is in there. Most of the time it's in there intentionally. And it's a book that took me about 2 years to write. And in a nutshell, I'll just wrap up on this. I'll wrap up your question with basically what I did was, with all the research I did when I was doing the Royal Arch of Enoch, studying things like, the occult, mysticism, mythology, Freemasonry, numerology, astrology, Kabbalah. I basically applied that to movies. And you'll clearly see, this material and this, these themes turning up in popular cinema. This is beyond dispute. I believe, like I said, I believe most of the time it's intentionally placed there. And this is the new book I wrote. It's titled Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies, and it was released about a month ago.
Fantastic. And I want to get into that very soon, but I had a few other questions for you before we even hit that area.
Sure.
One, for starters, we talk about symbolism often here, especially now we have a host on this network who is deep into it. You might know him, Ryan Gable, with the Secret Teachings. And
yes, I did. I was on that show.
Oh yeah, well, he also his show is here on the L&M network as well. We run it too, and on Wednesday nights, him and I do a show together. So he certainly has opened my eyes to this area a lot more, and we find symbolism all over the United States. But what does the symbolism actually mean, and who is it placed there for? Why is it there? How relevant is it today for us?
Well, it's a good question to ask. A lot of what you would call, just symbolism, like, when you get into, it's a broad question. I'll try to answer it as best I can.
Sure.
But, like, for example, a lot of the